offensive line, their annual need to protect Phillip Rivers, and now to block for last year's first-round pick, Melvin Gordon, the running back. So, and you look at their line across the board, it's just all no names and failed draft picks and free agents. So they're very in need of upgrading their offensive line. Their defensive line is also in dire need of upgrades. I believe they run a 3-4. That is another key element. When I am doing all of my analysis, I have for days, weeks, and months been analyzing free agent signings, past draft selections, and current depth charts to accurately assess team needs, because that's the biggest weakness in the majority of mock drafts that you see on NFL Network, on ESPN, anywhere on the internet that you're looking, is 9 out of these 10 people putting out these mock drafts do not have an accurate understanding of what each team feels is their team needs. Most of these guys are just looking at numbers from last year and going, oh, well, they struggled, they were bad against the pass, so they need to go secondary or pass rush. Oh, they gave up a bunch of sacks, so they need to draft an offensive lineman. Who's the best tackle? That's who you have to take. Quite often they're not looking at, this offensive line could upgrade, but both of their tackles are locked in. It's got to be a guard or a center. And this third or fourth best tackle doesn't make sense because they've got both starting tackle spots filled. Common mistakes, or assigning another super common mistake that most mockers make is assigning defensive linemen to the wrong schemes. You have to keep in mind if a team runs a 3-4 or a 4-3 and what the player prospect that you're considering is also an ideal fit for. Very important things. These have all been taken into consideration by yours truly, and none does it better, I promise. Now, the way I see it, there are 4 realistic options for the Chargers. One, of course, always being for all these teams a trade down. And the reason I point that out first is because I feel it's very likely for the San Diego Chargers, although I feel they're going to be unsuccessful. The reason I feel that it's possible and likely that it could happen is all of the best non-quarterbacks are here. So in a sense, this is the first pick of the draft. You've got your choice. If you think Jalen Ramsey is the best player and that addresses an area of need in your secondary, you can trade up and get him and say, we got the best player in the draft at pick 3. You could do the same with defensive lineman DeForest Buckner, and you could do the same with offensive lineman, offensive tackle Laramie Tunsil, or possibly offensive tackle Ronnie Stanley, who for months now I've been trying to tell people that even though he's been locked in as the, without a doubt, number 2 tackle to Tunsil's number 1 tackle and Tunsil's debated best player all around in the whole draft, I have for months been trying to tell people that I don't see the difference between Tunsil and Stanley. And honestly, if I was a GM looking to draft a tackle in this draft, I would prefer Stanley to Tunsil. When you look at them on paper, they are almost identical. Almost identical. And that's why I could not figure out the just consensus separation between the two, an anointment of Tunsil at 1 and Stanley at 2. On paper, they're identical almost. So I told myself, well, it's got to be on film. There's got to be stuff on film on these two guys that I haven't seen that separates Tunsil from Stanley. Because on paper, they're the same. I know I've said it a bunch of times, but it's true, okay? And now, a day before the draft, you're finally starting to hear talk of, well, Tunsil might not even be the number 1 tackle on a lot of people's boards. It might be Stanley. I'm like, hello, that's why these top 2 teams who could both desperately use a franchise Pro Bowl left tackle for the next 10 years to build around. That's why both the Titans and the Browns bailed out of those top 2 picks. If any of the argued best players in the draft, and that's a problem, there's no consensus on who the best player in the draft is. But the consensus is that it's about three names. Tunsil at offensive tackle, Buckner on defensive line, and Ramsey in the defensive backfield. if any of those three were inarguable superstar, best player in the draft, their as advertised build, one of those two teams at the top, the Titans or the Browns, would not have traded the pick away and would have taken whoever the best player in the draft actually was. The fact that both of them traded down suggested to me that Laremy Tunsil, especially, who made sense to both of them at 1 or 2, is not actually this consensus separated number one left tackle that we were being told that he was this whole time, just up until yesterday, unless you were listening to me. Now, the counter on that, before the Chargers' time on the clock is up here and they have to make their pick, they might even get skipped here if I keep rambling. The one thing that I will say to counter that is, now that we are a couple days towards the draft, 90% of what you hear about player evaluation from teams is lie, smokescreen, believe the opposite. Okay, if people that the league is just too smart to go, to not know, well, they're looking at a tackle, for example. I mean, you get those, okay? You're going to have those situations where people know what your area of need you're going to address is, what you're kind of looking for. So when that is the case, you try to talk down the guy that you like the most and talk up other guys, so that you can entice a trade with someone else where you move down, they move up, they take a guy that you threatened to take or whatever, but never really had any interest in. You move down a couple spots, you still get the guy you wanted all along, and you get an extra pick or two to show for it. That's how you win in the draft, and that's what the Chargers will try to do, because I don't believe there's a clear cut here. I think any of those four they would be ecstatic with, although I think Ramsey really doesn't have a spot on this roster. If they have strengths on the San Diego Chargers team, it would be their linebacking core and their secondary. And Ramsey would be going to play safety, not starting at cornerback, which is, I don't think you take that with the third overall pick. It's not going to result in wins for this team. So I think they need to go defensive line or offensive line without question. So your picks then become Buckner on defense, which I'm hearing a lot of rumblings about, but that could also be to entice a trade up, or you go with Tunsil or Stanley, whoever you believe to be the number one tackle. If you believe Stanley is the number one tackle, then you trade down no matter what. You trade down with Dallas one spot if you have to, so that they're guaranteed their guy. You trade down with Jacksonville 2 spots, or Baltimore 3, or San Francisco, or Cleveland, who's got the pieces to trade back up. If you want Stanley at your offensive tackle, you can't take him at 3. I don't see that. So, with the third pick in the NFL draft, the San Diego Chargers select offensive tackle Laremy Tunsil out of Ole Miss, who a couple weeks ago, my interview guest on VikingsDigitalDiaries.com, Dane Brugler of CBS Sports fame and NFLDraftScout.com fame, told me he was the number one rated player on his draft board in the entire draft. That was what most people said just up until a week or two ago. No injury, no off-field stuff to change that. So I really feel that the assessment of everybody liking Stanley and him being a high coveted pick is absolutely true. But I think that the slight downgrading of Laremy Tunsil is mostly smokescreen. And I think if the Chargers don't go offensive tackle, man, they are so stupid. Buckner could answer a lot of problems on their defense and make their defense go from mediocre to really good. But that doesn't help anything. Like their priorities are Phillip Rivers, number one, period. And then Melvin Gordon, the rookie running back. And they have a terrible offensive line. No guards, no tackles, no center, no nothing. So you take the best chance to have a Pro Bowl perennial franchise left tackle, and there's no reason to believe that is not Laremy Tunsil. It's Tunsil and Stanley is a lot like Wentz and Goff. Tunsil is Wentz, has the higher ceiling, the bigger upside, maybe a little more developmental though. for right now. Stanley is the more ready to go, the more polished all-around player, but he has less potential. There's on a scale of 1 to 10, he could maybe be a 9 or a 9.5. On a scale of 1 to 10, Tunsil could possibly be a 10. But Tunsil might also be a 5, and Stanley will at least be a 7. So that's your debate. It's the same with the quarterbacks. And I think that San Diego has to go with Tunsil at 3. They can't make a trade. They fail to make a trade down, and they stay at 3. Or we see the most trades in NFL history in this draft. I have an asterisk by almost every team. Wouldn't surprise me. But we have them staying put here and taking the best left tackle, supposedly, in the draft, because that's what they need. The guy who they believe is the best left tackle, that's the right pick for them. And I'm their GM in this mock draft, so that's what we're going with. Laremy Tunsil, number 3. That means the Dallas Cowboys are now on the clock. They've been on the clock for a couple minutes, sitting at 4, and they are a hot topic. You are going to hear and see so much nonsense, and I'm sure you have, that the Cowboys are drafting running back Ezekiel Elliott with the 4th overall pick. Let me assure you, that is not happening. I promise you, okay? I pinky promise you. That is not happening. The Dallas Cowboys are drafting defense, period. End of story. They are not drafting a running back. They have the best offensive line in football, by far. They have no weaknesses on their offensive line at all. All 5 guys are really good to exceptional. And they proved the theory that anyone can run behind that line and have success last year when they signed thought to be washed up has-been running back Darren McFadden from Oakland to be their running back, and he ran for over 1,000 yards behind that line last season. Keep in mind, you're thinking, oh, well, everybody runs for 1,000 yards. That's no big deal. The leading rusher in the NFL last year, Adrian Peterson, had, I want to say, 1,400 some yards, maybe 1,600 tops. So Darren McFadden at over 1,000 yards was a top 10 yards back last year. The only place he failed, oh, and he did great receiving as well. I had him on a fantasy team. I know that for a fact. The only place he failed last year or didn't produce the way they wanted to was in the touchdown area. That was not on him at all, first off. They never had a quarterback. They were without Tony Romo. They couldn't move the ball and get into scoring range to get touchdowns in the first place. And secondly, that's never been McFadden's MO as the, red zone goal line touchdown type of back. So they went out and spent some of their free agent money, one of their few known names and decent-sized multi-million-dollar free agent contracts this offseason to get the ideal complementary running back to Darren McFadden, and that is former Washington Redskin running back Alfred Morris. He's proved that he can be a top 10 workhorse number 1 back in this league just 2 and 3 years ago. He would also, like I say, be a wonderful complementary back and change of pace back to Darren McFadden. McFadden has the speed and the outside ability and the play catching ability. Alfred Morris has the between the tackle ability and the pass blocking ability. So it just and then they've got 3 or 4 other running backs on their depth chart yet too at the moment signed to contracts. One being Lance Dunbar, who they're still not giving up yet and a little high on as well. So there's 0% chance that they're taking Ezekiel Elliott with the 4th pick. Not 0, but 0.1%. Like Jerry Jones is known to do the wrong crazy thing from time to time. And that would be, picking Elliott would be that. But so he will go. I'm the GM here. This is my mock. We're going to pick it up a little bit. Time on the clock's getting reduced, apparently. Commissioner Roger Goodell has just told me Dallas has just 2 minutes to make their pick. So like I said, Dallas is going defense. The 3 options, there's only 3 options here. Unless they trade down, again, there's always a trade down option for everybody, so I'm not going to single that out anymore unless I'm calling it to happen. Their 3 options are Buckner, Bosa, and Ramsey. Ramsey believed to be the best overall player in the draft. Secondary is not an area of need for them at all. Not at the cornerback position, not at the safety position. Last year they spent their first round pick, invested it in the secondary. The year before that, their first round pick was invested in the secondary.